You're going to love this class with Ehsan Khazeni, a Persian astrologer from Iran. We talked about ancient astrology systems, zodiacs, and a whole lot more. I just want to say hi and welcome to my friend Ehsan Khazeni, an astrologer from Iran and the maker of Bindu software. Here, I met Ehsan several years ago at the ISAR conference, I think it was. And just briefly, again, he's going to be talking about Persian astrology, which is a fascinating mix of both sidereal and tropical. It shows this time in history where the Greeks were mixing with Indians, or the Greek system was mixing with Indian system and Persians, and this whole kind of fascinating conglomeration of sharing and cooperation and just awesome stuff. And, so I'm real glad to have you, Ehsan. And what do you have for us today? First, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started and whatever you want us to know about that.
Well, thank you again. And, I started learning astrology something like 15 years ago. And then, it was not just pure astrology. It was a mixture of astrology, occult sciences, and Eastern occult things. And then finally, I got into astrology, the real astrology. And still, it was some sort of mixture of Vedic. Actually, it was a contemporary Persian astrology, which is the mixture of Vedic, Western, and Sufism astrology.
Ah, Sufism. So, okay.
Yeah, so for example, we were using the actually many Western concepts at the same time, and also we were using the Persian remedial measures, which are mostly Islamic, actually, using the Islamic mantras and the Sufism mantras, and it was all the mixture because Persia, from the very ancient times, Persia was a plural culture, and from the ancient times, actually, we always got many things from outside, and we also gave many things to the other cultures. So, but after years, actually, I started to go deeply into Vedic sciences. I started to study the Vedas. I started to learn Sanskrit, and then I started to actually practice only Parasha, Virat Parasha, or Shastra, and in a very a straight way, I went into the Vedas. And then I thought maybe the Vedic astrology is the best branch of astrology. And, only
it is, right?
like 2000. Yeah. well, it was before I go deeply into Persian astrology.
Yeah, we all have our best, it's like somebody's child, it's like, wait a minute, my child's the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then then I met one of the good Western astrologers, Naomi Bennett.
Oh.
And she suggested me to read my chart, and she also offered me to read her chart in return. And on that time, I said, wow, I'm a Vedic astrologer. I can surprise her by giving her a lot of good information. But she's a Western astrologer. She may not give me good information, because Western astrology is, these are the things we usually listen in our side. And then when she read my chart, I said, wow, it's very good. Yeah. And then I became more interested to learn more Western astrology.
Yeah, I met her at a conference. I just met her at the Sedona conference, very briefly. Kind of like when I met you, because I was teaching and she was like, oh, hi. And then, anyway, yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I didn't know that. This is great. I didn't know any of this, so I'm glad to learn this.
Yeah, and then actually I started to learn more on Western astrology, and then Western astrologer asked me to actually teach them the Persian techniques, because I live in Iran, and I support they were thinking that I am very good in Persian astrology, but I was not. The first time, because actually we have a bunch of manuscripts in Persian which are not rectified, which are just kept in the libraries. And we don't, it's something like 200 years that no astrologer worked on Persian astrology.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, because that's what I meant. Like, hardly no one else does it because, it's kind of not as enmeshed in the culture, I think, now, right?
Yeah, and in 2015, I first started to actually work on Persian astrology. And then I found some fascinating things. And, it's like, you dig a mine in other countries and find the small diamonds. And then you dig the Persian astrology and find such big diamonds, because it's virgin. Nobody touched it.
Right.
And, yeah, and then I found, for example, the Persian Dasha system, which is called as Fardar, or known as Firdaria in the West. Yeah, and it's as like as Vimshottari Dasha. And with the experience I had on Vimshottari Dasha, I could bring it into live practice. Then I worked on different areas, and then I found, wow, we have Shadbala in Vedic astrology, and we have the power of weakness system of Persian astrology with a 9-layer. And it actually contains the techniques available in Shadbala as well as the Vargya Balas. It's a combine of Shadbala and the Vargya Balas at the same time. So I thought,
Vargya Balas are the ones that come from the different Varga strengths, the Sapta Varga and Shad Varga.
Shad Vargas.
Yeah.
Yes,
so that's
exactly.
Complicated, but yeah. Oh, so there's a correspondence to that in Persian astrology as well, huh?
Yes, exactly. Then I found, wow, we have all the systems, and we have the solar returns, and whatever I already learned in Varshapal. It's very stupid, but I first learned Varshapal, the Indian version, and then read the Persian texts. Okay. And then I found, wow, we have 10 times more of the same material here in Persian and Arabic texts.
Of course.
And then I started.
That's fascinating. No, just to say, yeah, because and I've been studying a lot. I mean, I've been studying Tajika off and on for quite a while, but I really got into. I'm going to be drilling down into it a lot more in the next few months because I'm teaching it at the Sedona conference. But it's very clear that you can see that there was this kind of hard fork branch in Vedic astrology that was totally from interacting with Persians, because it has really no resemblance to Parashara astrology at all. It's really a combination of the Vedic kind of streamlined approaches to certain things, but with for example, where you have the parts of fortune and the different parts, the Arabic parts, India calls them sahams, and you have the different, but the same, transit work, the Eshraf and Ithsal yogas and all of that. So it's a total other branch that's completely, that totally comes from interacting with the Persians.
Exactly. And this is a part actually developed in India, something like 14th and 15th centuries at the time of Nilakanta and Kesava. And then the court of Akbar was the bright
I got the book right here, Tajik Nilakanta.
Yeah, exactly. And then, even before that, we have the technique called the Berigu Saral Padati and Berigu Chakra Padati. We have the Berigu Chakra Padati in Persian astrology as well. Mm. And it's actually one of the biggest features of Persian astrology. So, it was always a big mixture. And then I first started learning Vedic astrology, and having the experience of Vedic and Western astrology, I could return to Persian astrology, start to redevelop and revive the Persian techniques as it was.
Are there a lot of other Persian astrologers that you know of, or are you kind of one of the only ones who are doing it? Because that's what I thought, or...
Yeah, internationally, actually, I'm the only one. But, we have many local astrologers here, right. Something like 20 teachers and something like 800 or 1,000 practitioners.
Are the other astrologers who are studying Persian astrology, do they also study the texts and whatnot? Or is it kind of like, just like village astrologers? Like, are they scholars in this regard as well? Or is it more like, like it is people just practice?
Well, the funny part is actually Persian astrologers these days just practice Vedic astrology. Because something like 15 years ago, a Vedic practitioner actually brought the Maharishi, a Vedic practitioner started to teach Vedic astrology here, and somebody else brought the Maharishi Jyotish to Iran, and all the team practitioners started to learning Maharishi Jyotish. So still people use Jyotish chart, and the contemporary Persian astrology is more Jyotish than Persian astrology.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. One of the things that, I've been doing a lot of research into the Zodiacs the last couple years. And I'm actually finishing a book on it. It's not going to be a huge book, but it's mainly, it's sort of titled now, it's titled A Concise History of the Zodiacs, because it's actually just going back and pulling out the important kind of texts and sort of moments where astrology kind of turned, and with the different, the origin in Babylon, the 1230 degree sidereal portions, and then Ptolemy, Hipparchus, Ptolemy, Persia, India, and really kind of breaking out that, but also just more of the concepts as well, because most people have a hard time understanding just the concepts between, for example, the two different zodiacs, and literally like what the zodiac even is, between a calendar based, like tropical, which is really the earth going around the sun, and then sidereal, which is really the sky. And you can take one and measure the sky with this, but just kind of understanding what's really going on. But what's amazing is when you look back in the ancient cultures, you realize how much like cooperation, and there was no like, oh, these guys are right, these guys are wrong, sidereal is right, tropical is right. There wasn't that kind of battle or fighting or wars going on. They were really all just trying to figure it out, and with remarkable accuracy. They knew what they were doing, and you really see a lot of it in Persia because of both systems developing and being shared at that time. Because it wasn't like the Greeks were doing sort of sidereal and tropical kind of in transition, but the Indians were always using sidereal. But you see in Persia, they were mixed. It was all kind of mixed because they were at the point, and it stayed that way, which is the amazing thing. Is it didn't split off like Western astrology split off into tropical, sidereal. Of course, the Indians always stayed sidereal, but Persian kind of kept it going. If that makes sense. Am I describing that pretty much correctly?
Well, yes, actually, you're right. In Persian astrology, there is always a big discussion among astrologers about the tropical, sidereal, and not only about the tropical and sidereal zodiacs, but about every detail of the planetary motions.
Oh,
so,
right.
For example, in Persian astronomy, spherical astronomy, they use actually 11 concentric circles. And they see, okay, how the planet moves through this circle, and how it actually goes through another circle. And all the
similar to the epicycle? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is it similar to Ptolemy's epicycle model, or is it that Ptolemaic
more advanced
cycle model?
Yes, it's like a Ptolemaic model, but it's more advanced because actually a Ptolemaic model just defines the planetary motions, but they actually consider all the cosmology, the whole cosmological movements, and they developed more and more.
Awesome. Yeah. And again, this is what I've also been really just drilling down into, because there's so many sort of misconceptions, especially about the history is so mangled at this point, because it's like, well, Hipparchus discovered precession, and then it led to then it led to tropical, and then it did this, and all of that is really, it's not really quite right. Hipparchus understood there was movement, but he wasn't sure what was moving, and then Ptolemy kind of developed this epicycle motion that's based on a geocentric model. But so there are many different variations on how the kind of story has really played out, and so just really fascinating to explore it. The other thing that I thought was really fascinating when I looked at Persian astrology is the usage of like nakshatras and tithis and all of those things actually in the astrology, and also using tropical as well and stuff like that. Can you explain that a little bit, like how it was put together?
Yes, it's really interesting. Actually, on the beginning of a Persian book I was reading last night, it's written, okay, what are the features of different styles of astrology, different schools of astrology? And it explains the Babylonian astrology is basically based on the magic.
Yeah.
So they were looking for the magic of the stars and the powers of the stars. And Indian astrology is based on religion, and the religion of India, Hinduism, is also based on astrology. And the Greek astrology basically based on mathematics.
Right.
And the Persian astrology actually took all the good things from all these three.
Both, yeah. Yeah, you can see, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that Persian writers are very loyal about the techniques they got from different cultures. So when they talk about the faces, for example, they call it Roman faces, Greek faces, Indian faces, the teaching of Ptolemy, the rectification of Indians, the rectification of Ptolemy, the rectification of Vitus Valens, the rectification of Mashallah. And so they mention which one is given from which culture and which country.
And so
it's
just to unpack a little bit, because everyone's not as advanced. That's one of the things that I wanted to, like when I corresponded with it, it's like, so you're talking about the loyalty to like Vitus Valens, who was a Greek astrologer, Mashallah, who was a Persian astrologer, maybe Varaha Mihira, who was an Indian astrologer, and the Surya Siddhanta. You know, the thing that's also just so fascinating is that the early, and especially I'm really fascinated at that time, after the Hellenistic tradition kind of fell away, and the early Persian astrology, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century, and when they were studying mainly like the Surya Siddhanta, and then some Egyptian texts, and then they started to bring in more of the Greek texts later, and then there was the transition into finding the calculations of Ptolemy, mainly from Almagest and the handy tables. And then once they realized that the astronomy of Ptolemy was very tight, then they translate Tetrabiblos into Arabic, and then it was kind of like a sort of hard fork in the tradition after about the 9th century. It almost then started to become exclusively tropical. Is that pretty much correct? Is that sort of like the early history?
Yeah, historically it's correct, but there is a fact. Biruni has a quote, I love his quote. Is it, it's impossible for people to actually learn such a complicated version of astrology from wrong and, not correctly translated works of other nations. So it means that actually they already had some texts, but, after Arabs invade, all these texts were actually burned. And, there's a story for it. When Arabs actually invade to Iran, there is a story, and they said, okay, is there any book or is there any text better than Quran? They say no. They said, so you don't need any other text. And this is one story. And then there is a reviving story of Persian astrology after actually the Caliph's time. When Mansur the Caliph wants to lay foundation of Baghdad, which is actually the capital of Iraq right now. Yeah. And then he actually employs 3 astrologers. And these 3 astrologers are Nobakht, which was a Persian Magi, Mashallah, which was Jewish, and the third one was Ibrahim Fazari, which was an Indian practitioner, Vedic astrology practitioner. He and his son translated Surya Siddhanta.
Right.
And these 3 astrologers found the election or the muhurta for laying the foundation of Baghdad. And it's really interesting.
And that's the chart that we looked at when we spoke before, right?
Yes, and the interesting part is that chart is sidereal.
Yes, sidereal. And this this was about the 8th century. Sorry to interrupt. This was about 8th century.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because on that time, actually, we had the Ayanamsha something like 2 degrees and between 2 or 3 degrees. I still couldn't rectify which Ayanamsha they exactly used because actually it's not. Exactly. We cannot judge that they were using that in that way or this way.
Ayanamsha is always tricky. That's the problem of sidereal. If you have a problem, that's where exactly. But we know pretty much. And so because now we're more sophisticated, we can really dial it in, but that was always the problem. And one of the things that I noticed is back in the Persian, in this time that we're talking about, the 6th, 7th, 8th century, 9th century with Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Biruni and Mashallah, is all of their their zodiac charts were literally, star charts. You say Zijas, is that how you say it, Zijas?
Zijas, yes.
Yeah, the Zijas were literally star charts where it was all stars. So it was purely sidereal because you're calculating stars. It's all math and where exactly are the stars. And this is probably the reason why once they found the handy tables and the Almagest, and they said, oh, these star charts are much more accurate. This guy Ptolemy really knows what he's doing. What else did he write? Tetrabiblos. Tropical zodiac. Okay, now we'll do this. And it stabilized the zodiac. Does that make sense? I mean, that's the way it seems. Is that pretty correct, at least in that sense?
Well, it's a part of the story, but at the same time, they were working on the whole space. And the reason they finally chose tropical zodiac is that they actually found a system based on the tropics, celestial equator, and all the circles that actually measured from that equatorial system. So they finally decided,
populations,
finally they decided to actually use the tropical system. And it's very interesting because in 15th century, in 16th century, when Akbar the Great was born, 4 court astrologers actually casted his chart, 2 in sidereal and 2 in tropical. And it's really interesting because at that time, we have 2 Indian astrologers practicing the charts using Ayin Amsha, and 2 Persian astrologers. And it's interesting. One of the Indian astrologers uses very simple reading, just a birth chart and simple calculations and planets in houses. And he was one of the respectable astrologers on his time. He was not a, just a simple astrologer, but he uses very simple techniques in interpretation. The other one uses very advanced techniques. And the same thing goes for the tropical astrologers. One of them just studies the planets in houses and signs, and the other one uses all the sophisticated calculations. And it means actually 4 branches of astrology were practicing on the court of Humayun, father of Akbar. And then it goes on the whole thing. So, it's very hard to say which one was exactly chosen by astrologers, because I see all of them was practicing all the time. But sometimes, for example, tropical is more practiced and sometimes less practiced.
Yeah. So actually, I was saying not necessarily that the shift, and actually what I was also referring to is it's actually the time when what we would now call Western astrology kind of had that fork into tropical, because Persian kept using both. But this is kind of the point where at least the astrology that started to be practiced in the West, like for example in Europe, it kind of those writings of Ptolemy, which was the earliest versions, and again, a lot of people don't know, but the earliest versions, there are no versions of Tetrabiblos in Greek. The earliest is Arabic in the 9th century. Yeah. And so, we think that, it's probably true that Ptolemy wrote it in the 2nd century because that's supposed to be when he lived, but there are no Greek versions of it, right? So the earliest version is Arabic, which is from the 9th century. And then it was translated in the 11th century in Rome, I believe, right? Then you start to have the transmission of tropical astrology into Europe. But it was kind of after that. Before that time, astrology was pretty much largely still sidereal. And then after that, there was kind of like a split. Now in Persia, they actually kept doing both. But then the astrology that we now call modern Western astrology, so to speak, had that sort of break at that point. That's pretty correct. Is that right? That's the way you would look at it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And, there's funny story about the thing you told about the Arabic version of Ptolemy. The same goes for Vitius Valens. Actually, we have some text associated to Vitius Valens in Persian, which doesn't exist in ontology of valence. So when I write something on Facebook that according to valence, this is like this and like that. So some Western practitioners of Vitus Valence, who are very knowledgeable on his book, come and ask, how comes we cannot find the same in the
and it's in Arabic.
Greek version? Yeah,
that's because it's in Arabic.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so sometimes we have some sources from Greek astrology, which doesn't exist in the Greece itself, or sometimes we have something from Ptolemy, and we have a book called Scintilliculum, 100 words of 100 codes of Ptolemy, and it's really interesting because actually in many sources they called it pseudo-Ptolemaic.
What is it, Ptolemy?
Pseudo-Ptolemaic. Pseudo.
Pseudo, like pseudo, like
pseudo. Yeah, fake.
Okay. You know what's really funny, dude, and you might see behind me. I have the. Do you have yours?
Yeah, I also have.
I wanted to tell.
Okay, let me bring my third one.
Okay, I have a third one out there too. No, it's funny because when I wanted to tell the story when Ehsan and I started talking a couple of weeks ago, it was in like about 5 minutes. It was like, oh, wait. We kind of ran away and said, look, check this out. But the thing that's amazing about these astrolabes is that you can see, I'm actually in correspondence with an author. Have you ever heard of the text called Pseudo Mashallah? Well, it's actually the original text by Mashallah for the astrolabe. And the astrolabes were originally all sidereal. And it's really crazy because then you had a period where the astrolabes were sidereal on the front and tropical on the back. Now they're all tropical. So it's really kind of an amazing piece of technology. Just to say really quick what it is that it's something where the back of this is the back, I'll hold it up, is it connects the Earth going around the sun with the what we call the tropical zodiac with the calendar. It literally shows the exact. I actually have let me just do a really quick. Oh, wait a second. I don't have it here. Never mind. Yeah, you can see that. Yeah.
Yes.
So you can see this is like the back of the astrolabe. I just took a picture of it, and the back of it, you can see how it literally connects the tropical zodiac with the calendar dates. And I mean, it's kind of a theory that I have, but I think it's one of the reasons why, and it's certainly a repercussion or an implication of the tropical zodiac and connecting the Earth going around the sun with the calendar, like literally. Because what it does is it allows people to align, especially the way the astrolabe is used, is if you know the date, then you can align all of these longitudes, and then you can tell the time of day. You can do all kinds of other different things with it, but it really shows and really lands the concept that the tropical zodiac itself is the Earth going around the sun. And then the front of the astrolabe has it has the sky, it has the constellations, and it's a planisphere, or it's something where the three-dimensional sky is projected onto a two-dimensional surface. And so this one is called a planisphere. You have more sophisticated ones that have actual disks, but this is just a planisphere. And what you can do is you can point it at a star at night and then line up the longitudes and then be able to tell time with it and all kinds of cool stuff. What is your feeling about about the zodiacs and how the bringing together of these zodiacs, because the astrolabes were invented in Persia, and how that was implicated in the zodiacs? Like, you have thoughts about that?
Yes, something funny is that actually when we want to cast the charts by hand, we first actually cast a tropical chart and then shift it by Ainamsha.
Right, and then subtract Ainamsha from the Lagna.
Yes, and then using Astrolabe, you first actually measure the sky using Sidereal, and then you actually deduct the Ainamsha to have the tropical charts. In Persia, it was a thing in Persian astrology they do, because actually they first see the stars, and they, as you showed here, here we have, for example, Betelgeuse. The fixed star Betelgeuse is here. So you
Betelgeuse,
see Betelgeuse,
yeah, Betelgeuse.
yeah, you
And is
see
that
it
tropical
here.
or sidereal?
It's sidereal, yes. And then you turn this to find it, and finally you find it. And then you see this, measure this arc. Okay, this is the ascendant right now here. And you have the sidereal ascendant, as you said. It's a sidereal, simply sidereal.
Right.
But
Now,
you have the tropical chart.
But see, this is one of the things. I've been in contact with 3 or 4 people who have been doing extensive translations and research on astrolabes. You know, the astrolabes were also exported to India. They didn't really catch on as much, I think, because they also had to put nakshatras in. They also were very much aware of the hemisphere issue. So there's all kinds of, I think it was, I don't remember what the Jatika, it was something Jatika, which was actually the treatise on astrolabes. And some of these researchers are still alive. And I've been back and forth with them asking whether or not they were supposed to be tropical or sidereal, because half of the astrolabes that you get now, it's hard to know. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get. There's going to be tropical on the front, sidereal on the back, tropical on the back. So at some point, they just started using all kinds of different calculations for the astrolabe as the zodiacs got confused.
You know, actually, the zodiacs, the astrolabes can be more complicated like this. And you see, this is actually the sidereal.
Yeah.
And this is for the whole sign houses.
Right.
This one is for diurnal arcs.
Diurnal arcs.
Yeah, and there are 2 more for the 2 different calculations. Another one in the back. So
you've gone all in, man.
And actually, what the Persian astrologers was doing, they could do everything. They could find the direction, find the time, set the calendar, re-examine the zodiacs, the calculation of the zodiacs. They could actually re-examine the, even they could rectify the time. They could do the rectification using this astrolabe by measuring the arcs between actually the given chart and the time of the moments.
But
because one of the
location of each planet, they would still need an ephemeris.
Yes.
Yes. So, and again, and this is something that I think is really crucial. And again, this is what really showed a, you know, because you would think, well, you know, you can do all of this with the astrolabe, but you can only measure things that are fixed. And this is, to me, one of the main reasons why they fixed the, quote, zodiac to the orbit of the Earth around the sun. That's what a tropical zodiac is it fixes the zodiac. It takes the sky and fixes it to the orbit of the sun. So you fix the zodiac or the sky to the orbit of the sun, and the stars are already fixed in the sky. So you have these 2 things. If you can fix both of them, you can do a lot. But one thing you can't fix is the orbits of the planets, because they're variable. So if you want, you can still use the astrolabe to do a lot of things, but you can't erect a horoscope unless you have an ephemeris, because the orbits of the planets can only be measured, they're not consistent. So this is why you see that the tropical zodiac itself is even nailed into the calendar. It's literally, the tropical zodiac sign degrees are really identical to the calendar dates. You could actually use those days and degrees interchangeably. Like you could say 0 Aries, or you could say March 21st, and it's the same thing, actually, you know, like in a literal sense. But you can't do that with any planet except the sun. That's the only planet moving through the sky that you can do that with. And so
for the planets,
go ahead.
Actually, they had a solution for the planets, but it's a very tough solution. They could measure the planets. They could actually find the planet on the MC, because when it's on the MC or when it's on the zenith, they could cast a direct line to the planet. And then they could actually find the arc between that planet and a fixed star, which is close to that planet.
Oh, right. They find, yeah, of course. No, you don't necessarily need an ephemeris, but if you know what the planet is and where to look for it, and yeah, you don't necessarily need an ephemeris. If you have a telescope and you know where to look. But the point is that with the astrolabes, this was a tool for laymen, like lay people could use this. And I think one of the reasons why the zodiacs became, you know, it was first developed as a scientific tool, like everything else. It was developed for scientists, and then it became something
like a compass.
Huh?
Like a compass, yeah.
Right. But it was first developed by scientists, like you said, to cast astrology charts and do very complicated, you know, computations, obviously, because it's taking a three-dimensional space and collapsing it onto a two-dimensional surface. So it's a very complicated bit of spatial geometry. So only scientists can first do this. But then it became a technology that they used in the culture. I don't know if you know this.
Exactly,
but,
yes.
And once they did that, they had to simplify it. And I think this is why you wind up seeing, like, now the whole thing is tropical, because I have, in fact, both of these are tropical. It's a tropical on the front and tropical on the back. That's what this one is. This one is tropical on the back, sidereal on the front. And I don't know if you know this, but you know the author Geoffrey Chaucer?
I heard of him.
Chaucer, he actually published the main astrolabe text in Europe about the 11th century. Chaucer, and because he wanted to give an astrolabe to his son, his like 13-year-old son. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So what wound up happening is that these very complicated scientific devices started to be used in everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. You know, in something like 18th century, 17th century, and 18th century, everybody was using astrolabes in Iran. You know, and astrology was, as you said, for laymen, and many charlatans actually were simply using this and calculating the ascendant. And your ascendant is like this. So actually, in Persian system, we have a system called ascendant reading. Reading your ascendant. So it's really interesting. It's something as easy as Sanskrit in astrology.
Probably works really good. That sidereal ascendant is pretty accurate.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. And one of the kings, actually one of the ministers, feels bad about this, and he says everybody is actually involved in astrology. Then he goes to the king, the Qajar dynasty, and asks him, Your Majesty, I see that every people is going to be involved in astrology. So let me write a book against astrology, and I should start with you. Let me write that you don't believe in astrology, so others don't dare to believe in astrology. And he does.
Charlatans always come out and ruin it, right?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that they were used that, you know, up until like the 17th, 18th century.
Yes.
But it's funny because they were used in Europe also, at least until, I think what happened is around the Industrial Revolution, or late 15th, 16th century maybe. And then I think they started to die out. In India, they never really caught on so much. And I think it's because, and this is just a perspective that I have, you know, India has been so, you know, their system has been fixed from 2000 BC. I mean, back in the Vedas, it really doesn't matter that the horoscopic astrology came later. When the horoscope developed, and I think it developed in sync with the Babylonians and their sidereal portions. I think it's almost obvious at this point because it's too coincidental that 12 30-degree portions line up in almost exactly the same space, or exactly the same space as the 27 nakshatras from the Vedas. But their sidereal system was so deeply established that it's so stable, and it's so accurate and so easy to predict, and it just calculates things on the ecliptic, and it's very simple. That by the time like an outside technology like an astrolabe, which has all of this other stuff, comes in, it seems like they tried it, but then it just didn't really work because they already had their tools or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mentioned something really important. You know, they already had their own system, and a system does not mean necessarily something that includes everything. It means something that includes the working parts, the parts that are working together.
Once it works, it works. And so
exactly.
And again, this is why it's very interesting and obvious, and I'm sure it's obvious to you as well because you started studying Vedic astrology, that once the Indians started interacting with, whether it's Greeks or Persians or whoever, they're not going to just change the system. The system is it works, but they were completely open to everything that happened. This is why when they started interacting with Persians, well, of course, the scientists are going to share with each other. And there's this whole other branch of astrology that developed. It's a total hybrid between the structures and the systems of Vedic astrology, of course, including the Zodiac, without a doubt, the Sidereal Zodiac, but all of the interesting technologies of the Persians and all of the precise transit work, especially because this is a lot of what the Persian astrology and what even became the modern Western astrology is really based on, is all that precise transit work and the applying and separating aspects, the oppositions, the sextiles, all of that stuff that brings all the power in the Persian and the Western astrology. The Indian Tajika system is literally that on top of a Vedic background, right? So it's very clear.
Yeah, exactly. That's why actually the Indian Tajik astrology is it's still the same, but quite different style of Persian astrology. You know, we have the same names, but we have the different definitions. They made actually applying and separating aspects, as you said, as the yoga. Yeah, they are not yogas, and they made it like the yogas. Ikbala, for example, or Idbara. Actually, it means actually the good placement and the fortunate placement and the bad placement. But they made it like a yoga.
Right. They call them yoga, and they also have different yogas where one planet will form one planet maybe that's not in orb with another, but is in orb to another one, can form a yoga with it,
Radha Yoga, for example, transmitting of light.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, but you see, like for instance, Esheroth and Ithsal, those are even Arab terms, right? They're Arabic terms, right?
Exactly. They are Ittisal and Insaraf, which are two Arabic terms. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see, all of the terminology is actually Arabic, but obviously it's Indian. It's actually the Indian system, especially the Zodiac, and then all of the different, there's also other things. And I don't know if they're Arabic or not, like the munta, like when you're doing Varshpal, of course that's Sanskrit, but it's like the fruit of the year. But you have like the munta and different dashas, like the Patyayani dasha and different, these are obviously Indian words, but
munta is actually,
how much of that was innovated by the Indians? How much of that was Indians?
Well, Patyayani Dasha is the Indian version, and also there is, and Munta is the Arabic word again, means Muntaha, comes from Intaha. Intaha is is actually Persian technique, called Intaha means the reaching point. And Munta is really interesting because in Persian astrology, we do not use one sign a year. We use 13 signs a year. So it's 12 plus 1.
Okay.
So it means one sign and one Devada Samsha, 1 sign and 2 degree and half.
Okay.
1 sign and 1/12 of a sign for a month. So 1 Devada Samsha for months and 1 sign for a year. And we can say 1 degree and 5 seconds for a day.
Oh, okay. So it's like a progress chart.
Exactly.
And that's what the munta is. The munta is a progressed, it progresses the lugna forward each year. And so I thought that was probably an Arabic word. And so is a similar, like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and Panchapatak chakra is also Pataka chakra, sorry, Tripatak chakra. Tripatak chakra is the Vedic invention. Patyayani Dasha is the Vedic invention. Hada Dasha is actually using the bounds, planetary bounds, which we use in Persian astrology as well. But the Indians actually made it like a dasha.
Oh, okay.
For example, they also applied Yogini Dasha and Vimshuttari Dasha for a year. In some sources, they actually used the Vimshuttari Dasha. They multiplied the length of Vimshuttari by 3 and use it as days. For example, the length of Ketu Dasha is 7 years. They use 21 days.
Right. And that's Hada or Patyayani?
It's Vimshuttari.
Oh.
For Hada, Yeah. For Hada, they use another subdivision called bounds, planetary bounds, or planetary terms, which is the most famous one is the Egyptian terms. Western medieval astrologers also use it as essential dignity.
Okay. Yeah, and in Varshpal, I've got the best results with Patyayani Dasha. It's funny, like you find one that works and then you don't, like it's enough to find something that works and then you kind of say, okay, this one works. I don't want to investigate the others, but yeah, also like the Varshapati, these are obviously Indian terms, but they probably derive from the, from the method. Is there like a literal Varshapal in Persian astrology, or is this something that the Indians decided to do to do like a Varshpal on Persian methods?
Yeah, actually, the way Indians decide about Pancha Adhikaris, 5 office bearers, which are Lagnapati, Varshapati,
Right, the Pancha Adhikaris, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Dina, Ratri Pati, and
Muntapati.
And Muntapati, yes. They use these 5. And in Persian astrology, we use another set of things.
Okay.
For example, we use the degree of...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we use the degree of part of fortune. We use the degree of, actually, the previous, the CZG, which is the previous new moon or full moon.
Okay.
Before the ingress. And we use a different terminology, but the items are different, but the terminology is the same.
Yeah. So that's what that's what I was just wondering about, how much. And again, this is the thing that is just really makes me so inspired and happy to see is that you have a different culture innovating, taking the concepts of what was happening in Persian astrology, but of course they're not going to practice Persian astrology because they already have a system and it's so solid. So they take the universal principles. This is one of the things that I think all, not just great astrology systems, but great astrologers can do is take the universal principles that work from any system and apply them, because universal truths are going to be universal no matter where they're applied. So you can take something like a progression, for example, and you can take that concept and apply it in almost any way, or an aspect. That's going to be a universal exchange of energy. And so, because the Indians, of course, were great innovators and the Persians were, they saw the structures from the Persian astrology and adapted that to a system, and that made sense within the way they were practicing, and just adapted it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I tell my students that it's fine if you actually install a big mirror on your car, and it's fine if you use actually a truck horn on your car or a small car, but you cannot go actually to a gas station with a Tesla car.
Right.
Some parts are adaptable. You can adapt some parts, but some parts really are not.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So we should be very careful about which parts we are going to adapt. If I want to use, for example, Vedic astrology, I cannot cast the Vimshottari Dasha using tropical system. It's ridiculous, But I can adapt. I can use some Persian subdivisions, or I can use some Western things. I can use, for example, Uranus in the nakshatras. Why not? Uranus is something discovered newly. But I can see, okay, I have Uranus on the cusp of 7th house, so it means something to the 7th house.
Of course.
Or I have, but considering that Uranus is a stranger, okay, I know it's not a Vedic planet, but I still can use it.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And what you're saying is totally true. There are things that adapt because they're universal, but other things are structural. And what you're saying, like especially like with Zodiacs, it's the place from where everything starts. Like, for example, we were talking before, it's like each system that has developed to kind of interpret that calculation. The calculation comes first. You really see it, really drawn out in the Indian texts, because in every Indian astrology text, every one, at the very beginning, they define the zodiac at the very beginning, and it says it starts with nakshatras aligned with rashis. It usually says 27 nakshatras ending with Revati or beginning with Ashwini, and Aries, fits with it. It's right at the beginning of every text. So that means that's where you start. That's where you start. And then everything after that is how you interpret that calculation. And
yeah,
so there's
exactly.
a sequence. One of the things, I don't know if you've ever seen, like, for example, the Yavana Jataka, that
Yeah.
one of the things that, and again, it's a very interesting text, but one of the things that is always, and again, if you read a lot of Indian text, you can see, one of the things that makes it very skeptical from a classical Indian perspective is they don't even get to defining the zodiac until like the end of the book, at the end of the text.
Yeah.
At least in the order of the way we have it. At like almost the very end of the book, then they finally say that Ashwini was placed at the head of the ram and blah, 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 blah. But it's almost at the very end of the text, and you would never see this in an authentic Indian text. Never. They would always define the zodiac first. So this is how you know that however that was compiled, it's not authentic. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's really interesting. The word Yavana means actually in Persian, we call the Greece Yunan. And Yavan, Yun, actually, it's also, I think it's the same name that it means, it also means Greek astrology. And many terms also derived like the Kendra, Apoklima, Upachaya. These are all the Greek terms. Kendra simply is center. The K C turned into K and read as Kendra. And it's very fine. I believe it's fine if they got some new divisions from Greeks.
Yeah. No, I'm not commenting on the. I mean, the text is fine. All of that. I just mean there was an idea that was like an Indian, you can see that it's not Indian. All I'm saying is because an Indian text that's authentic Indian has the zodiac up front. It's defined right in the beginning because it's a structure.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I'm saying. And you can see that Yavana Jataka was not, with no commentary on anything else about it, because the zodiac is at the very end. It's like the book is already over and you're telling us how to calculate the zodiac. They would never do that in Indian text. It's always so it's kind of, it's like what you said.
Yeah, but Sam, I'm going to mention something that we always have a mainstream and some side streams. What we are talking now is about the mainstream of Vedic astrology and the mainstream of Persian astrology, and at the same time we have some other sources of other different divisions, which sometimes they are confusing and sometimes they are leading. For example, recently I found a book, and on the preface of that book, Lahiri mentioned about the unequal nakshatras, which are starting from Kritika. So once upon a time, in a branch of Vedic astrology, also we have another branch of astrology. It starts nakshatras from Kritika, not from Ashwini. And the length of nakshatras are not equal. They are not 13 degrees and 20 minutes, or unequal. And it's interesting because, for example, Rohini nakshatra is like 20 degrees. And we read in the text that the moon stays more in Rohini because moon loves Rohini more than other wives. And it's interesting because in that division, it's 20 degrees. So sometimes I guess actually, there are some side streams of astrology that are forgotten or unattended.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, there's no doubt that, especially when you go back and you look at the writings of Garga, and by the time of Varahamihira, things got, Varahamihira came and like stabilized pretty much what we're doing now. By the time Varahamihira came, before that, there's a lot of things that are a little bit different, especially as it relates even to Tithis. I'm looking at a thing now called the Garga Jyotisha that is really transformative around the Tithis. I'm going to talk more about that at some point. But one thing I just want to say about nakshatras and unequal nakshatras and nakshatras being measured by the Tara, by the star, I think that's obviously all legitimate, because the stars are there. But when you go back and when I look at the primal divisions, especially of the sidereal zodiac in general, and you go back to where it really was laid out first, which was in the Vedanga Jyotisha, the sidereal zodiac is a measurement of space. We say sidereal, that's a Greek word, which means of the stars. The Indian term is sayana, which is the space without the ayana.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Exactly.
it's the near ayana. It's the near ayana, which is the space without the ayanamsha. And the sayana, which is the space with the ayana. And they knew both, and they were doing both. And they're measuring space. And you know they're measuring space in the Vedas because they're also measuring time. And they're measuring how far the sun moves in one yuga, which is 135 nakshatras. So you can measure 5-year portions by the sun moving through 135 nakshatras, which is moving through space. They're not talking about hitting this Tara or hitting the star. They're talking about the movement of space.
Yeah, exactly.
They're measuring equal portions of space. So to me, that's the fundamental, because that's the space. Now, of course, at different portions of space, you have stars, you have Tara, you have different touchstones, but there's no allowance in the Vedanga Jyotisha to say this nakshatra is larger than this one's larger than that one. No, they're 27 equal portions. And
yeah,
the
exactly.
nakshatras and the sun and the seasons are measured out in 4.25 nakshatras or 4.5 nakshatras, and all that, not just space but time is measured in nakshatras. So that's kind of the primal to me anyway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because actually it was a time that Abhijit was also included as a 28 nakshatra, and Abhijit is the difference between the lunar nakshatra mounts, lunar mounts.
Right.
So it was something like 4 degrees the difference between these two cycles.
Yeah. So there's no doubt. I mean, see, the thing is this. And this is why, it's actually why I wanted to talk to you, because as much as you've gathered all this information, you see it as these are different things that were happening, because there's so many ways that this stuff works, instead of, oh, see here, they're wrong, it was a mistake, and people get so like jacked up about stuff. It's like, man, none of these guys were wrong. These were amazing scientists. These are the people that developed all of the spherical geometry and all of the stuff that we use. They understood. Just because they were looking at things from many different ways doesn't mean, because we find something new, that everything else was wrong. It's all there. It's very complex stuff. There are many ways to look at this. And the beauty is interpreting all of it. Like interpreting something like the nakshatra space is being different than a Tara. So as much as you've identified it, let me hear you interpret it. Then I'll be impressed. And I'm sure people can interpret it. So that's what's important, is how does the unequal divisions of nakshatras, how do you interpret that differently? Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. And something really interesting, as you said, we have different ways to measure the sky. We have a very big sky, unlimited sky, boundless sky, and we can measure it in different ways. And something really funny I recently found is that in Persian astrology, they actually measure the planetary aspects, not only on the zodiac plane. Because when we see, okay, we have a simple angular distance between 2 planets, one is here, the other is here, and it's a 90-degree and it's a square, and we simply measure it like this. But if we change the observer view, you can say it's a trine.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and if it changed, you can see it like a sextile. So it's actually another method that Persian astrologers check, and they say, okay, if it's a trine, if it's a square at your birth time, that's fine. It's a square, and we interpret it as a square. But if it sees like this, if one planet reaches a transit, one planet comes here, and your planet was here, it's not a square anymore. It works like a trine.
That's some complicated math.
Yes, exactly. And when I was working on it, it's actually something like 3 or 4 months that I'm working on this system. And everywhere, when I read the text, it's written, it's one of the most complicated techniques of calculation. So it took me something like 3 or 4 months to understand how to do it. And
that's why I have on a genius here, mathematical genius.
Yeah, and it's funny because some people actually like Biruni do the azimuthal projection. Some other do the declination. Some other use the local diurnal arc.
Oh, yeah,
So
the diurnal.
different methods of actually calculating these aspects are mentioned by many different astrologers, so astronomers. So still I'm working on all of them to adopt one of them. Which one is more accurate and which one works better? I don't know.
How are you testing it? Are you, you know, one of the things, and I'll just say this, one of the things that I found to be hard, or that I would find difficult with using two zodiacs is, again, testing. You know, one of the things that I did, and the simple, you can really see, and you and I talked about this a little bit earlier, you can really see why the Indians decided, you know what, we're going to use ecliptic longitude, and that's it. That's it, ecliptic longitude, and that's it. Because it actually simplifies things. Houses, rashis are all nailed to the ecliptic. This is why you don't have all the different house systems in Vedic astrology as well, because everything is whole sign, whole house, because they're just locating the planet on the sidereal ecliptic, and that settles it. And when you start getting into house systems, you're finding your place on Earth and projecting that place on Earth into space. That's why everything gets weird at different altitude or different, you know, latitudes and longitudes. Whereas if you're just measuring the planet on the ecliptic, it just nails everything in Rashi and house. So they just kind of said, okay, we're just going to nail it to that and not complicate it any more than that. Whether that's to benefit or detriment is to be decided. But how do you case study? Because I do a lot.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Yeah. Well, there are two different things. The first thing is actually when a client comes to me, I immediately use the Vedic astrology because it's very simple, very straightforward, and
very stable, like I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But for my own practice, I do my own research. One of the ways I do the research is actually using my software. Have you seen my software, SRS? Yeah. So when I find a combination, I go to SRS and search for hundreds or thousands of the charts having that combination. And I read the biography of that people, and I go to the events of their life, and I check them one by one. And I made a checklist, something like 100 items, and I mark them how actually they work or not. Sometimes the results are disappointing because, you know, I have a technique which never tested. But sometimes it actually pinpoints a very important thing. And sometimes, you know, sometimes there are some ordinary techniques which are just like quantitative techniques. For example, you cannot judge on a single technique by its own. You have to technique and see other items, and if several of that items says it's okay, then it's okay. Several says no, then it's not. So sometimes we have the techniques that work on their own, which are very direct and I can immediately use. So the thing actually doing is actually making a very advanced version of SRS. The more I study Persian astrology, I immediately add it to Hindu and SRS.
SRS?
For my
What's
SRS? Yeah, SRS is Saptarishis research software. It includes something like 29,000 charts.
Oh, okay.
And then you give the combinations. For example, I want all the charts having Moon in the first house and Lord of the seventh house is, let's say, with Jupiter retrograde. Search. It searches all these charts and gives you the charts having the exact given combination.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's free.
Oh, okay. I gotta get. And so you're and so a lot of your research, you're looking at it to be very predictive, and in that sense, as you're looking how to calculate this. It's kind of like an obliquity of an aspect, right? It's
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's
actually this is the same logic that they made the actually house systems.
Yeah, I would think so, because I would think that in different, you know, again, especially in higher longitudes, I would think that the whole chart spin, and I guess it's a universal thing, right, where the whole chart winds up tilting or something relative to your longitude, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, there are several methods. For example, most of the techniques use the MC as the cusp of the 10th house. But some techniques, instead of using MC, they use zenith, which is
Mhm.
straightforward from your head. And it also makes sense.
Yeah, they both. Yeah, that's the thing. All of it makes sense, and it's also why, on some level, I'm utterly thankful that I found Vedic astrology, and it makes it so simple.
But there's a problem here.
Some things are simple. And people will say Vedic astrology is simple because then you get into Vedic astrology and it's like, Jesus Christ, it's so complicated. But that part of it is simple. And again, it's kind of tricky.
Yeah, exactly.
The calculations are quite simple. But then you have complexity that can blow your mind with nakshatras, with all the yogas, it's very scientific and technical after that, but the calculations at least are very stable. This is one of the things I started talking about a couple years ago when I started talking about the Zodiacs a little more, is that it's very clear why, with Indian astrology, we still study it the way it was 2,000 years ago. And it absolutely has to do with the fact that the Zodiac has not changed, and the system itself, the books that were written 400 AD are still the ones that we practice, certainly because the methods worked. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it anymore. But also, it was just very stable, whereas, again, it doesn't mean it's better, but later, with all the different calculations and especially the tropical zodiac, which again is kind of whether we know it or not, it's like a conflation of two things. We're basically taking the calculation of the Earth going around the sun so that we can be in that kind of three-dimensional space and projecting that into the space to see how the energy is coming down and whatnot. But it certainly complicates matters. For sure.
Yes, it complicates the matters. But at the same time, last night I was talking to a friend of mine. I asked her to help me to teaching a part of my workshop, and she said yes. And suddenly she withdrew, and she said, "Sorry, I don't have time. I have to go somewhere else." And then it was the second time she did this, and then she said, "Okay, where is the problem?" I said, "I cannot tell you where is the problem, but I ask you to carefully check these 6 layers of your chart. Check the Lagna chart, Rashi chart, Moon chart, Sun chart, Navamsha chart, Karakamsha Lagna, and the Aruda Lagna, and see where is the problem resides in." And she said, "Wow, how do you expect me to do all these complicated things?" These are the easy things for the Vedic astrologers. For other systems, it's very complicated.
And when you're doing this is all sidereal.
Yeah, also sidereal, yes.
Of course, yeah. Amazing. Well, that's great, man. It's been great talking to you. Time goes fast. We've already done about an hour, and I'd like to have some more conversations with you because it's great to get into some things a little more technical next time. Huh?
Of course, yes. It would be a great pleasure for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell us about your software again and your website and stuff, because you have an excellent software. By the way, before we hang up, I want to talk to you too a little bit about the software.
Yeah, sure. My website is binduastrology.com. And for the free SRS software, people can go to binduastrology.com/SRS and download it for free. Actually, we recently made a partnership with David Cochrane and Cosmic Patterns software.
David's
so
great.
people who have people who have Sirius or Kepler software are able to have Bindu. Works with Kepler and Sirius. So, for example, if you already saved the chart in Bindu, in a single click, you can send the chart to Kepler. And if you have already saved the chart in Sirius or Kepler, with a single click, you can actually send it to Bindu.
That's great. So, yeah, that's fantastic. And so, yeah, David Cochrane, who was the inventor and the developer of the Kepler software, you guys have a partnership where you've shared your technology, just like the Indians and the Persians, right? And the West,
exactly.
all triangulating and sharing the bounty. So, well, look, it's been great to have you, Ehsan. And next time maybe we'll geek out a little more with some specific stuff, because we talked before. We're bringing up some charts and bringing up some of this stuff. But right now, I just wanted to have a kind of introduction to bring you on, and thank you very much for your time, and I'll put the links to all that in the description and on the YouTube video as well.
Thank you for having me, and namaste.
Well, Shibai.